and I'm a little wary of what has happened, which is that I have been cast in at the deep end, as it were, to talk to you, and it may make sense, about austerity. That's what's on the program, and really what I want to do is to share some thoughts on austerity in its class context. Now, a long time ago, I remember reading by some now forgotten classicist a statement that said, whenever you hear a people being talked about as primitive or savage or cannibal, you can be sure that somebody's about to steal their land. And it seems to me that in this moment, we have a kind of equivalent. And when you hear the words austerity and retrenchment in a capitalist society, equally you can be sure that the working class, working people, are under a kind of merciless attack from the ruling bloc. Those phrases, retrenchment and austerity, are cover for precisely that kind of attack. And so that is what we have to understand. Now, the attack that is happening is ruthless, it's continuing, and it's intensifying. And we have to understand that also. And we have to understand why the ruling bloc is getting away with it to the extent that they are, because getting away with it to a massive extent they certainly are. And that bit of getting away is happening because they have scored a victory, indeed a series of important victories over us. I'm taking it that everybody in the room is more or less like me, a working class person of some kind. I am an African Jamaican working class man who happened to have been lucky enough to get an education in this place, right? So, and I hope that everybody else in the room is more or less some kind of a working class person. Now, what is the victory that has been scored against us? There's been victory at the level of organization and victory at the level of ideas. At the level of organization, does it or does it matter that the organizations that have been created to struggle and fight for working people have effectively been stolen from working people? If you think in the UK about the Labour Party, nobody now thinks of it as a working class party, but that is how it started. And the process of stealing it is now so advanced that right-wing trade unionists and no less a person than Rupert Murdoch, who is a billionaire, can impose Tony Blair on us as the leader of what was once a working class party. And the trade unions, similarly, have been stolen. There's at least one person, she's not in this room at the moment, she's sick, who has an issue with her employer. And can she get her trade union to do anything significant about it? And does it matter that the trade union is exactly the same one that some years ago facilitated Rupert Murdoch in that business at Wapping? So the wheels are very much within wheels, and there we are. So they have had victories over us at the organizational level, and they've had victories also at the level of ideas. Why does austerity work at the level of ideas? Because they have managed, using the media and using education, to put ideas of individualism and nationalism seriously into the heads of working people. And I remember the other day hearing, it's almost bizarre, a poor American say that I am poor but I vote rich. Right? And in a way, that's what we're having at the moment. Working people who can have no interest whatever in the effectively anti-working class, effectively nationalist, effectively anti-immigration, therefore anti-black, effectively anti-poor people generally, program of UKIP, because of the individualism that has been put into our heads, because we've been pushed from our moorings of our class moorings, people believe that somehow they are examining their interests and connecting to their interests when they vote, leave aside for the Tory party, but when they vote for UKIP. And that is where we have a major set of, in a major area of ideas, working people have been defeated, and the minds have been captured by ruling class ideas that when you are the subject of those ideas, you do what the ruling bloc wants, and you think that you are acting in your own interest. And that is the extent of the victory that has been scored over us. Now, this is obviously a moment of austerity. And another of the ways in which we have been defeated, and it connects with those other bigger ways, is that the ruling bloc has been able to persuade people that somehow they are acting in the interest of something called the nation, and that they are solving a national problem or crisis on behalf of everybody, and that somehow what they are doing is in our national interest, because are we not, after all, part of this nation? Now, this thing goes very deeply, you know. I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but just before the Falklands War, you know what facilitated Maggie? A nationalist speech by Foote. A very nationalist speech. After that, poor Maggie had no alternative but to send the task force. Right? She had been facilitated into that whole thing, which ultimately had disastrous effects for working people in Britain. So, nationalism matters, and the extent to which ideas of nationalism and individualism have been put into our heads matter. So, austerity. So, national structural deficit, legitimately needing to be reduced, and needing to be reduced very quickly. That is the program that we have been sold. And this is in the nation's interest, and therefore it is in all our interest. And people identify, or do they? And what is really wrong with that? The truth of the matter is that at the moment of that national crisis, between 28 and 2010, the Tories were already arguing for cuts. The only reason the cuts didn't happen at that time was that the Bank of England agreed with the Labour Party that going down the cuts road in the way that the Tories were advocating made no national economic sense. And that is why, or part of why, the Labour Party went into this big rescue operation of the banks and so on, because somehow they were satisfied that capitalism without a banking system, without that mode of capitalism, which is now central to capitalism in the West, successfully at its center, couldn't work. And so, in that moment, the Labour Party did all of the stuff that we know they have done in terms of shoring up the capitalist system, allegedly to save you and me. But how you and I have been saved by that set of moves is quite another matter. And if you know, tell me, and when you find out, please tell me, because I cannot see how we have benefited. We are in a moment, an extended moment, where, for example, I was speaking to somebody earlier from the States, and what we know is that something like since 1950, objectively, wages in the US haven't risen at all. What they have in fact succeeded in doing is to give the workers cheap food and credit. And that is what they've done. That is at the center of working people's satisfaction, if they are satisfied with capitalism in the USA. And why are people satisfied with capitalism here? This is not a successful system, my brothers and sisters and comrades. I don't know how many of you saw the panorama of a few days ago. Did anybody? Which dealt with low wages? Hands up, as we say in Jamaica, hand in the ear. Right. Now, what you should have done, because what it was dealing with was the extent to which screeds of working people, in fact in their millions, are now working for such little wages that their wages have to be subsidized by the state, by you and me. And it gets past muster because we get convinced that it is working people who are being subsidized. But in fact, it's the capitalist system that's being subsidized by working people, because capitalism is no longer paying people anything like a living wage. And I'm not talking about Africa or India or Jamaica. I'm talking about right yeso. It is here that working people are no longer, in this moment of recession, being paid anything like an adequate wage. The people who run this place, let us get back to them and their victory. They, as they have convinced us that class and talk of class is foolishness and backward, have not for a moment abandoned the defense and advancement of their class interest. If you think they have, tell me how. What is the mode of reorganizing the economy at the moment but about moving resources out of the hands of poor people into some other people's hands? What is Cameron's program? And it doesn't matter what you're looking at, you can be looking at the health service and stuff is happening there that will enrich people who are not you and me. And they will tell us that what they're doing is reorganizing it in their interest. They are doing nothing of the sort. If you look at prisons, what is happening in prisons? They are increasing the numbers in this place and in the United States of America. And what are they doing and why? It is about, everybody knows this, of course, a prison industrial complex. It's about allowing capital to benefit from the imprisonment of workers who they are no longer employing. Right? And it doesn't matter where you go in respect of these matters. That is what is happening. And that is what we have to understand. And when somebody says to me, as somebody once did, now you see that Gutzmore, he is still clinging to the wreckage. I like the wreckage. because even though Marxism in the real world is in crisis, Marxist theory still represents a wonderful way of understanding our socio-economic current reality. If you know a better way of understanding it, beg you come to me and share. Now, anybody who is seriously influenced by Marxism would know that Marx didn't say that his theory could work if it only worked in theory. He says that the real test of it is what happens in that intersection between theory and practice. And there has been a massive failure of practice, which we need somehow to catch up with, understand, and analyze. So right now, we are, as working people, and never mind the accent, that is what I am, a Jamaican working class man who came to Britain in 1961 and had the luck of getting an education here at a time when you finally got through the A-levels, they gave you a grant that you could live on. As opposed to now, where there's something that they're calling, what are they calling it? Austerity has facilitated them into charging us how much? 30,000, is that what it is per year? For an education which you end up owing them for. And in this moment of recession, so there's a direct attack on students. There's an equally direct attack on workers. Do we know the extent to which, for example, employment law had been changed and manipulated so that we have next to no free access to defending ourselves against employers who are increasingly wicked because they feel untrammeled? We know that. We know that you have to pay now to get to an industrial tribunal, and so on. And the lines of attack on working people in this moment of alleged austerity, the lines of attack just lengthen, and anywhere you look, you see the line lengthening. So, austerity, we must understand. austerity, we must see and know that whenever it comes up, what it signals is the truth of the statement that we working people have lost a battle and there is ground that we need to recoup on, and so on. So, the government that's now in place, and everybody knows this, you don't have to be that bright man Jones or any kind of a, what do they call them? You don't have to be particularly bright to know that the current government has a program on the economy that is completely unnecessary in terms of our interest. We never had any interest in cuts, and we still don't. We have an interest in investment, and they are not interested in that. We have an interest in growth, and they have no interest in that. Or, if they have an interest in growth, it is growth that benefits them and that assaults us in fundamental and serious ways. Why is the ruling bloc, as represented by the Tories, at a moment of total shamelessness, why are they seeking to cut at the pace that they are cutting? What are they doing with stuff that we call infrastructure that we once valued? When I came here, one of the valuable things that I found is that there's a library up the road which showed me a whole heap of stuff that as a child in rural Jamaica, I've been told a whole set of stuff about evolution and how idiotic evolution was and so on. And then there was a library up the road, and the books were all there, Darwin and the ones that they had denounced in my church, and the stuff was all there free to be read. And very quickly I came to the conclusion that what I've been taught was rubbish, and that I really needed to educate man. They're cutting the libraries. You go to the library now and try to find a collection of books on black people, our history, and you can't find them anywhere. A few years ago, they sold off all of the collections that were made in a moment when they had when they had African or African American collections in all of the municipal local authority library set up. I knew some of the people who made those collections, who ran them, and shortly afterwards they were sold off. And that's not just the only areas of cuts. Schools are being cut. They don't say that. They say that we are facilitating choice. Right? That is what they say. We are creating academies. Academies are places of excellence. Academies are a con. Academies benefit particular people who they facilitate into affording them. Our taxes are subsidizing those places. In the meantime, they are busy tossing our black kids out of ordinary schools and into sin bins in some horrible places. And somebody said, I don't remember who, that once the kids get excluded in that way, they are on the path to our prisons. Hurrah. Right? So, on this austerity thing, my brothers and sisters and comrades, there is much to understand. The lines of deception to which we have been subjected, the extent to which, on the basis of individualism and nationalism, we have been conned and captured, the extent to which, on the basis of idiocies about the outdatedness of class analysis, we have been allowed ourselves to abandon a class approach to almost everything, to race, to austerity, to it doesn't matter what. We've done it. And there are consequences. Yeah? So, the assault that is the subject of this conference on working people and black people is part of this moment where, for all kinds of sometimes foolish, always wicked people, we come under attack that we have to understand. I see Marcia, and I'm glad to see her, and I know she's going to tell us some important and distressing stuff. But her brother's case isn't the one that interests me most. The case that interests me most at this moment is the one to do with Duggan and Rodney, Rodney. They are wanting to be allowed to get in the habit of shooting to kill persons they associate with guns. That is what they want to do. And this extension, this shooting of Azza Rodney and of Mark Duggan symbolizes that. And we must know that it symbolizes that, and we must stop it. We must fight to stop it. Yeah? So the current struggle around those two brothers, we don't control it, but trying to make sure that the policeman who shot Azza Rodney gets convicted, and trying to make sure that the men who shot Mark Duggan, there's a conspiracy, you know.
Of course, yeah.
An open conspiracy. They weren't interested. They say they knew that a certain man had guns to sell to sell Duggan. They say that they knew that he had 3 guns. Why didn't they go and arrest him? They say they monitored the movement between them, and there came a moment of a gun handover. Somehow their operation breaks down, and they don't see the guns being exchanged. And that doesn't matter. They shoot Duggan anyway, even though on all of the evidence he comes out of the car not carrying any gun. And are we willing to allow them to get away with this formulaic defense in which they say, as he came out of the car, he menaced me by this non-existent gun. And when I shot him one time, he spun around with this non-existent gun and menaced me even more, so I shot him to death. Brothers and sisters, let us let them get away with that and see the price we will pay. Last week, we all live in London, so you saw the Evening Standard story about guns in London. The story was cobbled together on the basis of years and years and years of alleged gun crime in London. Very little to do with what's currently happening. And that's part of the process of frightening us into accepting that them shooting alleged gun carriers is justified because they are protecting you and me from a growing wave of gun crime. There's no growing wave of gun crime, and if they have the information about growing waves of gun crime, let them go and arrest the alleged gun criminals and not shoot them in cold blood as they want to do. I lived in Jamaica I was born there and grew up there, but I lived back there between 1997 and 2009. I know how police forces invent stories about people with guns. I know how they tell lies, as they did in the Duggan case, about shootout and all of that. If you want that line of thing that's characteristic in Jamaica, which they train the Jamaican police into anyway, to become the common parlance and practice of this place, let us not be on our guard in relation to those matters. So, austerity is many-faceted. Austerity has a class dimension. I've tried in a way to address that. Austerity has to be understood. Austerity operates against us. It operates against us in the interest of the ruling class who are operating it, against us from whom they're taking in order to facilitate themselves. And that is the short of the long story about austerity. Thank you.
So what you have accurately described is a huge, huge problem.
Yes.
The key question is how we go about responding to that
Yes.
and counteracting that.
Yes.
The narrative about austerity and the need for cuts, the unaccountability of the police, these are all huge problems. And to individuals, they seem like unsurmountable problems.
Yes.
And so we settle for small compromises like Lawrence murderers getting locked away, like the finding of the public inquiry into Azza Rodney that it was an unlawful killing, and then everyone celebrates how great and momentous that is, which is true. But then, over time, people kind of accept that as being the high tide. How do we move on to actually deal with this in a more systematic and effective way, do you think?
Okay. I think the starting point is a correct understanding, perhaps deeper even than, not even abandoned even, perhaps deeper than the one that I've given, but a proper understanding proper class understanding of where we are and what is happening to us. And inside of the understanding that I offer, and I'll be brief on it, is the extent to which working class organization has been captured. But something else has happened, and I implied that long-term history and history of ideas stuff and political ideas stuff. But there was a time when working people reached for the Bible as their ideological tool. If you go and look at the Middle Ages, you see them talking, when Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? And right out of the Bible, they saw a class, a rejection of the class setup. When Adam was an ordinary farmer and Eve was whatever she was, if you look at that, you can't see any gentleman, you can't see any king and poor people and rich people. And that was their approach. And that remained the approach right up until Marx came along. And we've had Marx, and we've had now difficulty with Marx, but it leaves us with no unified and unifying theory that completely works about the nature of the oppression that we face. So we have to understand where we are, we have to reconstruct or construct theory, and above all, we have to organize. We have to organize together. We've got to establish links internationally and nationally so that we are not as dispersed and incoherent in our responses as we are now tending to be. There have been extended periods of class domination before capitalism, and people accommodated to it and also resisted. That is what peasant revolts were in the Middle Ages. We don't want to be modern peasants, just effectively resisting through sporadic uprisings and resisting through day-to-day resistance and so on. So you kick a policeman and whatever else you do. we need considerably more than that. And that is a challenge that we face. And that is all I can say on the matter. We need to theorize better. We need to organize better. We need to organize more comprehensively. We need to organize internationally and nationally. The different little groups into which we organize have to have links that are coherent with others in other places and around other struggles and so on and so forth. That is what I think we have to do. And doesn't seem to me to be any alternative, not yet anyway.
The first question I'd like to raise with you, Brother Cecil, is that you talked about the Labour Party as a working class party.
Historically, not now.
Historically. This is my point.
Ancient historically.
So we can have these discussions, right? Historically. Yeah. And almost who has been thrown up as a kind of a bogeyman has been this Tony Blair. Well, we all know the treachery of Tony Blair. But I want you to maybe respond to the point that I'm making, that the Labour Party has always been an imperialist party. Yeah. It's been supported by workers. Yeah. So that's my first question you can maybe respond to. How did they now present themselves historically? Maybe tell me when that was, because I probably missed it. When they were this working class party. The other point about austerity, it seems to me, I'll just make a quick comment and then go on to my final question, is that... Sorry about that. Is that we talk about austerity and we talk about class. But it seems to me we can't really understand properly austerity if we don't bring in the dimension of race as its twin half. Because when we look at the austerity in terms of its impact on the black community in particular, and I'm coming from a background of organizing within the black community, but I hastily had the London campaign against police and state violence is open to everyone. Because I know one of the objectives of the state is to isolate the various different communities and strike at us one by one. And underneath the question of policing and race, is the serious question of human rights and democracy, not just for black people, but for all people, as people now rise up against this austerity. But the question of race, it seems to me, hasn't been addressed as importantly. And I know the brief is austerity, but I don't see how you can look at it without looking at who is bearing the brunt of this austerity attack. And so coming back to the black community, you know, we have an astounding situation in which we have something like 34% of us who have been now stopped and searched more than any other race or group of people, despite the fact they always come out with their little lying statistics about things are getting better, and they've got their little Uncle Toms amongst us who push out this propaganda about the police are improving. We look in the prisons, in which we do so much work around, in which that you go, the report I get back, I say it, and I keep on saying it. That some of our prisons, the overall statistics is 23% of our young black men, particularly. We don't represent more than 1% of the population, and there's certain prisons that target the London area. The report I get back is like when you go in some of those prisons, it's like you're going to the Caribbean or Africa. There's so much black people there. And so it seems to me that these facts, and you've touched on the issue of education, which we talk about the exclusion as another discussion. The exclusion comes on to my last question, which is that most of these our young youths who are excluded are actually excluded by white working class teachers.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I would like you to maybe answer the question, the austerity is impacting so great on the working class, but yet if the working class is also suffering so much from this racism, how are we going to get together to tackle this problem? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Minka. Yeah, Cecil, if you could respond to that.
Brother Minka's question is exactly what I expect from him. And it's not put down, right? It's a good question, a good set of questions. I am not going to even try to defend overmuch the idea, but it's true that the Labour Party was in fact created as a vehicle for the aspirations of working people. It's a long time ago. And the process of capturing it by the bourgeoisie for what they have subsequently done with it is also ancient history. So it's a long time since the Labour Party has been, in any serious sense, a working people, an instrument of working people's power, an instrument of defense of working people's interest in any serious way. So I'm not going to disagree with you on that, Brother Minka. And we need to leave that one there. Your other question is to do with race and the power of racism in this place, the extent to which the ruling class has inserted racism as, or converted, if you like, this is a very high theory, converted white working people into objects of and practitioners of racism. That is undoubtedly the case, and it matters. So when I say individualism and nationalism, you cannot understand British nationalism or indeed European nationalism without the race dimension inside of it, without the extent to which internally and externally race has been central to imperialism and to imperialist exploitation. So on that also, I'm not about to disagree. Nevertheless, it is important that in speaking about these matters, we bring a triple analysis and a triple basis for organization to the matters that we're facing. So for me, race is important, class is important, gender oppression is also important, and that is the triple front on which we advance. Maybe I didn't say enough about race, but everybody can see some are black, and so on. And it's not a joke. But I mentioned policing and the race dimension of that. I mentioned education and the race dimension of that. I mentioned some other stuff which has a massive race dimension. The unemployment thing. Half our young people between 16 and 25, 50% of that, 1 in 2 are unemployed. Nothing like that anywhere else in the economy. So these are serious matters. The assault on public services has particularly impacted black people, especially black women, and so on and so forth. So it's not as if one is hiding that. It is simply that I took the brief, perhaps as globally as it needed to be, but inside of that, some specifics were missed. They are not specifics on which Minka and I are likely to disagree. It's just that in a short speech you can't get in everything. And so that's it.
Thanks, Cecil. Okay, I want to now go to Marcia for a final intervention, and then we're going to have to wrap up this panel, in fact, okay?
Yeah, okay. It's not really a question, so that's just the bit that you touched about on the shooting of Azelle Rodney and Mark Duggan. Of course, I also find that very intriguing, and I really want to see what happens in both those cases. And what I wanted to actually say was that to announce is that on Tuesday the Duggan family are expecting probably the result of the
appeal,
unlawful killing, lawful killing verdict, even though he didn't have a gun. So they, some of you may know, the family judicial reviewed that. So I think the result perhaps will be on Tuesday. But also the family, the public should know that the family are also judicial reviewing the issue about the collusion of the officers. And that's also taking place on Tuesday morning at the High Court. So I'm just basically saying, if anybody can get there to support the family, it's on Tuesday morning at the Royal Courts of Justice. Two very important issues on the Mark Duggan case.
Thank you for that, my sister.
10 a.m.
Good. And we need to be there in all the numbers that the court can hold. And, of course, there's space outside the court as well, so no problem with that. The Duggan case matters. Yes.
Fantastic. Yes, we do have time for one more, in fact, so Alice, please.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. One more question.
Sorry, before Alice goes, who else wants to speak?
Sorry.
Okay,
We've got about 4 minutes.
Yeah, we'll take. They can be rapid, and I'll remind you that we do have a whole almost an hour at the end of the day for responses. But yeah, okay, thanks. Alice, first then.
Yes, would you like to because I think you had your hand before.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see.
Would you? Yes?
You're speaking now, so why don't you go?
Okay. Do you think that austerity is also the reason why the British government wants to pull out from the European Court for Human Rights at the moment? And also, if this happens, is this going to have an impact on black communities? Is it going to be worse for us if the British pulls out from the European Court of Human Rights? Because we know that, in fact, UK, because I took my students some years ago to Brussels, and in fact, most of the cases in the European Court for Human Rights, it's England, which is most of the time condemned. So do you think that this is going to have an impact on us as communities, as black people?
The short answer is that I don't know, but I doubt it. And I doubt it because I think that the British Bill of Rights, on which the British state will have to retreat, will be identical to the European, whatever the founding document of that commission and court was, which came from here in any way. And I don't think that the British Bill of Rights will be any less or any more backward on human rights than that. So what's really happening around the case is that as part of this nationalist mobilization, the right-wing part of the British ruling bloc has mobilized around a set of idiocies, really, against the European Court of Human Rights. If you look at what they're saying, most of the things foolishness, whether prisoners should have the right to vote is hardly a major issue, although clearly prisoners should have the right to vote. And if you go through the things on which they've got het up about, there's no substance there. What the real matter of substance is the way in which Murdoch and the people who control the media on behalf of the ruling bloc, who own and control the media are trying to divert the interest of working people, all working people, black and white, away from the substance of what they're doing to us, to trivia that to do with who's coming from where in Europe and who is allegedly doing benefits, tourism, and it's idiocy. If you look at the figures, you find that the countries in Europe that are outside of the EU have higher rates of emigration than Britain. Check Switzerland, check some of the Norse countries, and you will see. Right? So that's one of the things that's happening. Another of the things that's happening is that the British ruling bloc, who have been backward in all kinds of ways for the longest while, which is why they allowed their industrial base to die, in the belief that somehow finance capital could cut it, and there's no evidence that it really can, and the consequences of that are going to be with us for a long time. But you have to know something about history, and you have to know that when the British originally stayed out of the common market, they then tried to create something called the European Free Trade Association. And they found that that was no basis at all for dealing with this very powerful entity called at the time the European Common Market. And they had to eat humble pie in order to get in there. I'm old enough and interested enough to know about that stuff. So they ate humble pie to go in, to get round de Gaulle's veto and so on. And having got in, they have subsequently set out to reorganize that thing in their own interest. And what they're now seeking to do is get back to the place they were originally in, which is to turn the whole EU into just a free trade bloc and nothing else. That is what the British ruling class wants. And that's what we have to know and focus on. Not the rest of it is froth to do with mobilizing working people to vote for them on a nationalist basis, on the basis of nationalism.
Thank you. We're running late. I'm going to ask each of you to make your points quite quickly, and then Cecil to respond to both of you.
Oh, yeah. You spoke about the hijacking of traditional working class organisations like trade unions, which Karl Marx calls the socialist schools. But, within the framework of post-industrial capitalism, how do you think we should attempt to organise now? Because most people aren't unionised, or most workers aren't unionised.
Thanks. So I'll just ask you
the
final point as well, and then respond to both. Thank you. Over here.
I have trouble making it short. I wanted to talk about the Stop Mass Incarceration and Criminalization of a Generation campaign in the United States, which you guys need to know about.
There'll be a time.
Maybe we'll find a way to get back to that, because it's a big and important story. Race is central to it, and so on. Yeah.
So thanks. If you just respond to both of those, and then we can continue that kind of discussion later on in the day.
I can't address that briefly. There's a big issue. Whole heap of our best African American and some other intellectuals have addressed those matters for the United States. So we need space for that one. What was your question again?
It was about how you think we should organise within
I don't have any answer. We are in a very difficult moment. Like I say, even the vaguely recognizable original forms of working class organization that were meant to defend us were long ago stolen and subverted by the ruling bloc, right? So Minka is absolutely right. This is not a new story. And the extent to which it has been used to keep right-wing Labour leaders in power, the extent to which this and that and the next thing has happened, all of that matters, and all of that is part of the history. So now, what people who are working people and black people who are interested in their interests have to do is analyze where we are and organize on the basis of a proper analysis of where we are. And that's all I can say. That's what I try to do in small ways, you know. And nobody has any answer, because Marx didn't say that the revolution was going to be automatic for working people. He didn't. He said that you had to conduct the class struggle and you had to win, and the bourgeoisie wasn't going to sit down and roll over. And they haven't. In fact, it is to some extent we who have. And to be starting from there is a bad place to be starting from, and yet that is where we are. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like us to thank Cecil for that wonderful opening analysis.